and I was seated in the second row, and the first row was empty. And just before curtain time, the people in the first row show up. Who should be there? Emperor Haile Selassie and a number of people who looked like they came from Ethiopia, and then a number of Japanese, presumably diplomats. Well, so they're doing a performance of Taskaraska. There's a sign outside that says in Japanese with small letters in English, "No photography allowed." I had a camera with me, a plain camera, no flash or anything. So I just put it under my jacket and went up to sit down. So seated in the first row is Haile Selassie, and seated next to him is a gentleman with a Canon camera with a lens about this big in front of it, with a flash attachment. And he's snapping pictures all through. I guess these signs don't relate to royalty. Well, I figured I'll just take one picture. We'll notice, because I don't have a flash on it. So I take one picture. He hears a click, and he hadn't clicked at that time. So he looked back, and I put my camera back in my jacket. And that was that for the moment. And then there's an intermission. And so this gentleman with the Canon camera with the Lollapalooza lens in front of it came over to me and started speaking to me in French. I says, I know some French, but I'm better in English. So he started speaking to me in English. So he says, what kind of camera do you have? And I showed him my little Nikon. And he showed me his Canon camera. And then the bell rang to go back in. He said, would you like to join us for dinner? I says, I'd be honored to. Where is the dinner? Oh, at the hotel, the very hotel that I was staying at. That's what was the dining room was said. Guests go elsewhere for dinner. So I came in and came to the dinner. Now, seated at the head of the table is the Emperor Haile Selassie. Seated at this end of the table is Emperor Hirohito, who has come down to welcome a visiting emperor. And then the gentleman who I had spoken to, it turns out he's the nephew of Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie did not have any sons, so the nephew apparently was heir apparent to the throne. And I was seated next to the nephew. And all the way down at the other end is Hirohito, who I never got to speak to. And Haile Selassie observed that I looked like the only Caucasian there. He asked his nephew, who's this? So I explained that I'm a medical officer with the 3rd Marine Division, and your nephew was kind enough to invite me to join you for dinner. Oh, that's nice. I said, would you mind if I asked you a question? I noticed on the front of the limousine, when it pulled up to the hotel, you have the flag of your country on the two sides. It has a Star of David in each of the 4 corners and a lion's head in the center. What is the meaning of that? He said, that's because I am a descendant of King David, the Lion of Judah. I said, how did that work out? He says, well, the Queen of Sheba was the queen of my country. And at that time they had polygamy. So Solomon had many wives. So he married the Queen of Sheba, cement relations between the two countries. And she had a son by him named Menelik. Now, when he was 12 years old, she sent him to spend a year with his daddy. After all, he has 2 parents. And at the end of that year, he became a bar mitzvah, son of the commandment. And he brought back with him scholars of this religion, Judaism, which became the religion of the royal court and the intelligentsia of what we today call Ethiopia. Well, the 2 major powers of East Africa were Egypt and Ethiopia. And there were a number of wars between those 2 countries. And in one war, taking place about 300 AD or so, the Egyptians won and demanded that the emperor either becomes Coptic Christian, which was the religion of Egypt at the time. This is pre-Muhammad. or become ex-emperor. So he chose to become Coptic Christian, which became then the religion of Ethiopia. But many of the followers of Judaism were not agreeable to converting. And so they fled to the north, and they were called Falashas, which in the Ethiopian means wandering shepherds. And they followed biblical tradition of Judaism, and they had the Torah. And they lost all contact with Jews everywhere else in the world. Of course, they were in an isolated area in the north of